Hello and welcome to Leadapreneur Online. We're looking at Module 3, Planning, of the overall learning journey of how to lead. And we're looking at Step 3, the ethical leader. And as always, we start with why. Why does ethics matter? Ethics matters because it's the ability to draw boundaries around what is right and what is wrong. An organization without an ethical leader is unable to define what it should do and what it should not do. Now this matters because that means the organization is either capable of great good or of great evil. Left to its own devices, however, without any ethical capability, it's likely that it will do more harm than good. And that's why we need ethics and leadership, to lead us away from evil and towards good actions. And we can see that in football. In football, ethics matters in many different ways. For example, imagine a sport where there is no sense of fair play, that was full of racism and full of corruption. It would be a terrible sport to watch and a terrible sport to participate in. And that's why ethical sport is the best kind of sport. It's a sport that's free from corruption, it's a sport that's free from racism, and has a great sense of sportsmanship and fair play. And in the same way that ethics brings success to football and makes it a better game, so ethical leaders build much better organizations. Organizations you want to be a part of, organizations you feel proud of, and organizations that are in turn much more successful over time. So when we look at these three quotes, we can understand why ethics become so important for leadership. The first one by Madame de Stael talks about the idea that as our technological capability increases, we must increase our moral ability in order to match our newfound prowess. If our machines are capable of great good or great evil, then we must learn how to control those machines in such a way that we create good. All this talk about good and evil might seem a little bit strange. After all, you're just sitting there in your room trying to learn about leadership. But that's the point. Good and evil matter every day in leadership. And the reason it matters is because you are leading people and you're leading them towards achieving something. And you're either leading them towards achieving something better or you're leading them towards achieving something worse. You always have a choice. And I believe that the right choice is to lead people towards building something better. And the way that you do that is as Shunzi describes. We recognize that we need to restrain our desires and accept limitations on our behavior and on the way we can behave in order to be successful. In other words, if we simply do whatever we want without any respect for limitations, if we allow our teams and organizations free rein, then it's likely that they will commit more harm than good. And so that's why the 21st century leader needs to find a way to find an ethical balance. And one way that we're looking for that is to see what Socrates says. Because he says that there is only one good, knowledge, and one evil, ignorance. And a great place to start, that I feel is pretty neutral with whatever religion or whatever background you're from, is to recognize that by acquiring more knowledge, you empower yourself to be more effective, whereas if you bathe yourself in ignorance, your ability to make great decisions is severely limited. So let's look at what you really need to know about ethics. The first thing is to understand the difference between morality and ethics. Morality is about defining what should be, and ethics is interpreting that in the local environment. For example, it's a moral belief to say we should not kill people. Obviously, that's a pretty good place to start, but you'd be surprised. In some places, it's not. And so let's pretend, it is such in society that morality says it's wrong to kill people. However, ethics is needed to interpret that in the local day-to-day context. What about a soldier who's fighting a war? What about a man who protects his family from an attacker? What about a doctor who takes on the responsibility to try and save a patient but is unable to do that? Obviously, these people are all involved in the act of good and evil in terms of killing people, but the local context matters immensely. And that's why we need ethics, to be able to interpret the local environment and to make the right decision from our moral belief. And so ethical capability is the ability to effectively decide and use your good judgment of what is right and what is wrong in the local situation. A fundamental aspect of leadership is to be able to make this capability. Right now, you're probably sitting in your room saying, all this talk about good and evil is a bit dramatic. Is it really necessary? And my answer is, yes, it is necessary. It is necessary because as a leader, you need to recognize the power that you have. You have the power to lead your people to make good impact in the world or to make bad impact in the world. And it is always a question of good and evil. Leadership is not about being neutral. It's not about just turning up saying, hey, I'm doing my job and that's it. I just tick the boxes. Sorry about that. That's management. Okay, management is about pursuing efficiency, and this program is not about management. It's about leadership and how leaders lead people. And if you want to be an effective leader, then you need to be prepared to take a stand and say, this is right, this is what I believe in. And if we look at the context of the 21st century leader, and if we look at our modern day and age, we can see that we are accelerating our technological capability. We're more powerful than ever before. But the question is, do we have the humanity to back that up? We talk about dreaming of building a better world. We talk about the need for sustainability, all this good stuff. But if we don't build the ethical capability to match those dreams, then that's all that they will remain, dreams. Effective 21st century leaders are at their heart ethical leaders. They strive to build a better world because they believe in building a better world. They seek to create good. They seek to lead their teams and their organizations to make things better. They're not prepared to simply stay on the middle line saying, I don't really care, because leadership is about people. It is about caring. It's about caring about what you're creating and the consequences of your creations and how they impact other people. And that's why serious 21st century leaders are serious about pursuing a better world. And this is where we can contrast this of some of my previous statements, where I said it's not about changing the world, it's building a better world. In my opinion, any fool can run around and change the world. You just need to buy a gun or do something dramatic, and there you go, you've changed it. Fantastic. People who want to change the world have not really talked about the conversation of ethics, because they haven't really talked about, well, what are we changing it to? What are we actually doing to build a better world? When we talk about building a better world, we are forced to confront the fact of what is a better world. What does it look like? And in doing that, we have to talk with the people around us in order to create a common understanding of what that better world is. And that's why we need ethics in leadership. Because if we're going to build a better world, then we have to have the conversations with the people around us to understand what that better world looks like, and very importantly, how we should go about building it. It's important to understand that this concept of the fight for good and evil is not for some faraway land and long ago in a place far, far away and that's all forgotten. It's a continuous battle, a battle that is fought every day. A better world must be built. It doesn't just magically appear out of nowhere. The reason we have a better world is because people work tirelessly together to build that better world. Without them, we would live in a world of darkness. And the world of darkness is what happened to a small country in Southeast Asia in the 1970s. In the mid-1970s, there was a revolution in a country called Cambodia, which is a small country between Thailand and Vietnam in Southeast Asia. The ultra-extreme communists called the Khmer Rouge seized power, and guided by their beliefs of what it really took to build a better world, they set about systematically destroying the country in order, in their opinion, to rebirth a new and better and stronger country. So it's important to understand that they did everything they could to completely annihilate the society that was there. So this is what they did. They set about evacuating everyone from the cities and forcing them to live in the land. Imagine that. Nobody is allowed to live in the city. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter if you're in a hospital, you're shipped out in your hospital bed and forced to live in the jungle. Secondly, they banned money. No one was allowed to own property. No one was allowed to buy food. You were only able to get what you got given by the government. Thirdly, they banned families. I know this sounds almost impossible to believe, but they banned any concept of family. Brother, sister, mother, father, uncle, parent. These were not allowed. You were simply loyal to what was called Onka, the organization. And finally, they decided that it wasn't enough to go that far. They also had to make sure that all the intellectuals who could corrupt the new revolution also had to die. So that meant that if you wore glasses, if you could speak a foreign language, if you had any kind of skill or capability, you were to be executed. And the result of this is called the Cambodian genocide. It's not known exactly how many people died, but it's in the millions. A hazardous guess is somewhere between 3 and 4 million people died out of a country whose population was no more than 9 to 10 million. And this was all in the late 1970s. And the reason I use this example is because it's an incredibly powerful example of what can happen when leadership and ethics don't mix. The Khmer Rouge had a twisted idea of what their reality should look like, and the result of that was devastation and the horrific death of millions. And only today, in the last few years, has the country started to rebuild itself and look towards building a brighter and better future. So what's an effective way of finding the right balance between good and evil? And there's a great quote here by Aristotle that I think can guide us on that. He says, "Some vices miss what is right because they are deficient, others because they are excessive in feelings or in actions, while virtue finds and chooses the mean." In other words, our capacity for evil typically happens because we are too deficient or have too much of a certain kind of behavior. And therefore, we can find goodness by finding the right balance. And that's why you have the table in front of you, to suggest a way of finding the golden path. And so I'm going to explain to you what the key concepts are behind this. The first is the desire to achieve. If we have too little desire to achieve something in our life, then we succumb to apathy. We become lazy, and we don't really pursue that which is right. On the other hand, a too great a desire to achieve leads to greed. We want too much. We want more and more and more. And it's important to understand that this can lead to a terrible path of destruction. Indeed, the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008 is fundamentally an ethical crisis. Now that takes a moment to think about. Wasn't it about the bankers, and wasn't it about the financial system crashing together? Yes, it was. But we need to look deeper. Why did the system fail? And the system failed because fundamentally the people became too greedy. The people were greedy because they wanted more. They wanted bigger houses, they wanted more houses that they couldn't afford. But the system sold them those houses because they told them, yeah, you can have these. And so the bankers did their clever deals and sold more and more and made more money, even though it was costing the health and viability of the entire financial system. Because it wasn't the bankers' problem. They would just sell as much as they could, and when everything went wrong, well, it wouldn't be their problem anyway, would it? And that's essentially what drove the financial system to the brink of collapse in 2008. People and greed. But what's more important to recognize is that this was allowed to happen. The leaders of the banks, the leaders of the financial institutions, the leaders of our government allowed a situation in which there were no limits on behavior. There were no boundaries around what was right and what was wrong. Simply do what you can to make as much money as possible without any regard for the future consequences. And therefore, it's no surprise that the entire system reached the point of collapse. Now, this isn't some moral rant or to point fingers at other people. It's to recognize that the world was almost brought to its knees by incompetent leadership, the kind of incompetent leadership that allowed Lehman Brothers to fail, that allowed so many other banks to be brought to the brink of disaster and needed to be bailed out. It's important to recognize that incompetent is the right word here, because they were incompetent leaders because they failed in their ability to effectively lead their organization. They effectively had unlimited resources, they had the smartest people working for them, there was nothing that they could not have, and yet they still failed to survive, and even worse, they succeeded in almost crippling the entire financial system. And so if we look at what made those people incompetent leaders, we can see that it's a fundamental inability to draw boundaries around behavior. Rather than saying, no, that's too risky, rather than saying, that's not the right course of action, they said, do it. Sell more, make more. And as a result, they brought their institutions and their organizations to collapse. And that's why it's incompetent leadership, because they weren't able to succeed in their ability to protect their organizations and ensure their success. And in the same way, in order for you to be an effective leader, you need to find the right balance of striving to achieve things, but not tending towards greed and not tending towards apathy. Secondly, we need to look at the acceptance of others. What's your attitude towards other people and other organizations? If you have too little acceptance of the others, you'll simply be trapped in a vicious world of hate. On the other hand, if you accept others too much, you become a sycophant. You're simply interested in pleasing them without standing up for what you believe. The golden path here is that of cooperation. Find the middle ground in which you're able to stand up for the values and the things that you believe in, but you're also able to accept and embrace others and their values. Third, focus on your awareness of the world. As we've learned already by Socrates, too little knowledge results in ignorance. But on the other hand, too much knowledge can also result in arrogance. We believe we know the world too much. This is called hubris, Hubris, and is known as the arrogance of thinking you are like the gods. We need to be humble and respect the boundaries of our knowledge, and that in turn gives us the capability to have a true awareness of the world, because we know what we know, but we also know what we don't know. Finally, we need to understand that people are driven by a need to control the world. At a basic level, we need to control our environment so that we can feel safe and secure, and that is only natural. Too little control in our lives results in fear and suffering. However, too much control results in stagnation and corruption. We need to find the middle ground of having enough control to drive performance, but not so much control that we become overbearing and stifle others. As you strive for all these things, maybe the most common principle, the universal principle of ethics, is known as the golden rule, and that can be summed up as treat others as you would like to be treated. And if you're in doubt about how you should behave, take a moment to think, how do you want to be treated? And consider your actions and think, would I like to be treated the way I'm acting towards others? Because that's a very effective and practical way of seeing if you're on the right path to being an ethical leader. So why do we need ethical leaders? It's important to recognize that in the modern day, with unethical behavior, an organization destroys the trust, credibility, and unity that it needs to be successful. With increasing transparency, communication, the simple fact is that in the end, the truth will come out. And this is what happened, for example, with Lance Armstrong. For years, he was able to mislead so many people about what really happened in his cycling team at the Tour de France. But eventually, the truth has come out. And he's been stripped of all his medals and all of his titles for the Tour de France, which not only was incredibly embarrassing for him, but embarrassing for everyone else who worked with him, and has been a major blow to the world of cycling. But it's not just about individuals. Ethical behavior guides the success of organizations. When we look at Lehman Brothers, what was once one of the world's most successful, powerful investment banks, a so-called master of the universe, today it's just a memory. And that's because it failed to find the right boundaries of defining its success. It took more risks. It pushed itself by demanding more and more. It was so driven by its greed that in the end, it collapsed because it went too far in demanding too much. In contrast, ethical leaders are able to find the golden path. They understand a way of pushing for performance, but finding the right boundaries in order to make things safe and secure. There's a balance between pushing for more, but respecting the necessary boundaries that we need to ensure that we stay on the right path. And in the end, it's important to recognize that ethics isn't just about being nice. It's fundamentally necessary for driving high performance. And in a world that becomes obsessed with sustainability, it's important to understand that sustainability is fundamentally an ethical concept. Sustainability requires the ability to draw boundaries around behavior and to say, we won't go more than this. This is enough. Unless we're able to do that, we will never be able to achieve our dream of a sustainable society. So let's conclude with some practical tips of how to be an ethical leader. The first is that you need to create clear boundaries around what is and is not acceptable behavior. Unless you do this, your people in your organization are not going to know what they should and should not be doing. So clearly describe the way that you think that your organization should behave. Should it behave with a sense of integrity? Should it behave with a sense of teamwork? Is loyalty important for your organization? Is it important for striving for excellence? Regardless of what the right combination is for you, your task is to make sure that those boundaries are created so that people understand what those boundaries are. Secondly, you then need to engage your people in a continuous conversation about why those boundaries exist. It's no good just saying, don't do that, do that. That's useless. People need to know why. They need to buy into it and understand the deeper meaning and thought behind it. So your task is not to be an ethical dictator, simply dictating to people how they should behave. Your task is to build a conversation around what is the right behavior. Because it shouldn't be something that should happen because I tell you to. It's something that should happen because we believe it's the right thing to do. And your task is to do that by enabling people to talk to each other about what we think is the right behavior in our organization and in our team. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, walk the talk. You need to be a role model and show your people that it's not simply hot air that you're talking, and that it actually matters the way that you behave. And what I would suggest as key behaviors for successful leadership are the following. You need to focus on being an authentic leader. You need to focus on being a leader who's open to new ideas and perspectives. And you need to be a leader who's passionate about transparency. You're willing to be open and let people see what you do and how you use your power in order to be successful. Authenticity, openness, and transparency are key for 21st century leadership. So in summary, what makes an effective leader? Well, an effective leader is an ethical leader, a leader who understands the boundaries between right and wrong and can guide their organization to respect and honor those boundaries and stay on the path of good. This doesn't mean that the leader has to be some sort of overbearing parent instructing everyone else what to do. That's the wrong approach. Instead, the leader needs to be working with their people to enable them to come together and actually live the behaviors that they believe in. So instead of acting with integrity because the leader tells us to, the people in your team act with integrity because they believe that's the right thing to do, and you as a leader make them aware of that and enable them to behave in that kind of way. To do this, we must hold ourselves to the highest standards of competence, but just as importantly, the highest standards of character. It's only when our creative capability is matched by our ethical capability that we can really build a better world. It's important to recognize that this is not just about money or technology. This is about humanity and ethics. If you want to build high-performing organizations, if you want to build a sustainable society, if you want to be a successful 21st century leader, then you must become an ethical leader. Because only then will you have what it really takes to lead and succeed in the 21st century. That brings us to the end of Module 3, and we can add to our master diagram of how to lead. We started with the green star of purpose, which attracted the people to come to work together and organize themselves to pursue that purpose. Now we can add the blue arrow of planning, which represents the fact that we've perceived the right problem, we've built the right strategy, and that we have the right ethical values in place in order to successfully guide us towards achieving the future. But so far, all we have in place is just good ideas, and that's why in the next module we're going to be looking at performance to understand how to transform great ideas into great results.